Welcome to the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. It's been a strange year for nickel miners. It's a metal in demand, not just because of its use in stainless steel, but of course because it's a key component of batteries used in electric vehicles. The market was already dealing with the war in Ukraine. Russia is the world's third largest producer of nickel, and the conflict saw buyers looking for supplies from other parts of the world. But then in March, a short position taken by a Chinese tycoon triggered an incredible price spike, jumping to $100,000 a tonne. Now, normally it's around $20,000 a tonne. The situation deteriorated so quickly that the London Metals Exchange had to step in and cancel billions of dollars worth of trades. Prices are back to more normal levels, but the electric vehicle demand is still there, and we've seen a flurry of mergers and acquisitions activity in the local nickel space in recent months. One Australian company positioning itself to be a player in the nickel industry is Poseidon Nickel. Peter Harold is the Managing Director and CEO of Poseidon Nickel. Peter, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Oh, thanks very much, Sean.
I want to get to what you made of what happened earlier in the year in March, but just what drives the price of nickel normally and I suppose 10 years ago and then today? I'm just trying to get a feel for where demand for nickel is coming from.
Yeah, that's a good question. And look, clearly there's been a lot of changes recently. But if you go back 10 years ago, and I've been in nickel for nearly 30 years now, it's all been about stainless steel. And 70% of the world's nickel was used in making stainless steel. So it was very much driven by supply and demand of stainless steel. And China were major consumers of stainless steel, and growth has always been there. And you sort of really look forward now to where we are today, and the market's about 3 million tonnes a year. So 2 million tonnes of that's going into making stainless steel. But what's happened is there's been, as you mentioned, the growth of electric vehicles, and it's coming from almost a zero base to a point where by 2030 they believe that it's going to be something like nearly 2 million tonnes of additional nickel required to go into making electric vehicles. So demand is going to surge, and obviously supply will probably struggle to keep up, and hence the reason why nickel prices are looking very strong now and into the future as well.
Okay, let's talk about March. You might have to explain. I don't. That's not rational. What happened in March, as far as I can tell. What did happen and why?
Yeah, well, you explained it well. So Tianshan, which is now the world's biggest nickel producer, they produce about 600,000 tonnes of nickel mostly in Indonesia, and that all goes into their own stainless steel mills. And what had happened was the guy that runs that, and I forget his name now, it's a private company, he actually took a position on nickel where he was actually short the metal. So in other words, he was betting that the price was going to go down. And in fact, the market was able to basically sort of almost second guess him, if you like. And so the speculators came in, and as a result, there was what we call a short squeeze, where basically the price, as you said at the opening, went up to $100,000 a tonne. And as a result, there were all these massive margin calls, and there was a lot of people sitting on the other side of those trades that, and as you mentioned, the LME stepped in, cancelled some of those trades. So it's been an unprecedented sort of situation, which I haven't seen before, and there's a lot of potential legal cases that are going to come out of that and are actually already underway. But traditionally, it was what we would just classify as a short squeeze, but it's just a very big one.
A hell of a short squeeze.
It was.
Are things back to normal now?
Well, certainly, as you said in the opening, they're sort of back around the nickel prices in the mid 20s, $25,000 a tonne, and it's certainly more normalised than it was before. But again, if you go back 10 years ago, the nickel price was probably half that, and so what's happened is as a result of the boom in the electric vehicle demand and that massive growth as the whole world sort of goes from internal combustion engines through to electric over the next sort of 10 to 20 years, there's just this massive increase in demand for nickel. And the nickel lithium hydride battery is the sort of go-to battery for the electric vehicle revolution. So just to give you an idea, in the average Tesla, the amount of nickel per total battery is about nearly 30 kilograms. It's a huge amount of nickel, and it's more than, there's only about 6 kilograms of lithium, about 8 kilograms of cobalt, 20 kilograms of copper. So nickel and aluminium are actually the far bigger, and then there's about 50 kilograms of graphite. But there's a lot more nickel in the battery than lithium, and I'm not sure that most investors understand that. So that's where the massive demand's coming from. And they're talking of nickel going from a market which today, primary nickel, about 3 million tonnes a year produced, to something like over 10 million tonnes in the foreseeable future. So huge amount of demand, and that's pushed the nickel price up.
Stay with me, Peter. We'll be back in a minute. I'm speaking to Peter Harold, Managing Director and CEO of Poseidon Nickel. Now, I want to get to your Black Swan project in a moment, but before we get there, what is the state of play of the nickel market in Australia? Do we have a lot of producers? Is there a lot of the stuff in the ground here?
Yeah, look, we do, and I think we'd probably be number 6 in the world. I think you mentioned Russia being number 1, and now Indonesia obviously ramping up massively. We've always been a nickel producer ever since the days of Western mining, and back to the original nickel boom, or the Poseidon boom as it was called, with an asset that we currently own, not Black Swan, another one called Windara, but that was the original boom that got going in '69, and then Western mining were the big nickel producer right up until the mid-2000s when they were taken over by BHP. There are other nickel projects in Western Australia. There's Murrin, which belongs to Glencore, which is a big HPAL plant, high-pressure acid leach plant. There's also Ravensthorpe. We are a big nickel producer in our own right in Australia, and getting bigger. There's a number of big projects on the slated to come on stream in the next sort of 5 years, including our project, of course, and we're the nearest new project or restart project. There's projects like West Musgrave that belongs to Oz Minerals, potentially soon to belong to BHP. And there's other projects that are in the vicinity of Kalgoorlie as well, both sulfide nickel, which is what we have, and also the laterite nickel, which is what Murrin and Ravensthorpe is.
Okay, so you're talking about the Black Swan project?
Indeed. So we have 3 projects, and the sort of the primary project, or the first one to get going again, will be Black Swan. That's right.
So you had a very positive feasibility study on likely output recently. Explain that.
We did indeed, yeah. So we've been looking at this project, which was previously owned by Norilsk, the big Russian producer, and it was closed in 2009 when the nickel price was sort of sub $10,000 a tonne. And what we did is we picked this asset up in about 2015 very cheaply. I think just over $1 million we paid for it. And what's great is there's a 2.2 million tonne processing plant. There's an open pit and underground mine. All the infrastructure's there, and it's just been waiting for the nickel price to basically, come to a different sort of level, and obviously we're in that space now. So we've put together a feasibility study based on mining about 1 million tonnes from the open pit, which is low-grade disseminated material, and we're mixing that with some very high-grade sort of plus 5% underground material from what we call the Silver Swan ore body. So we're mixing the swans together, if you like, like Black Swan and Silver Swan, and we're coming up with a project that's got a 4-year life, producing around about 30,000 tonnes of nickel over that 4-year period. So sort of averaging 7,000 to 8,000 tonnes a year of nickel in concentrate, which would then be sold to either a local smelter or shipped overseas to any number of parties that have expressed interest.
Okay, so nickel is mined very similar to gold or something like that, is it?
Look, all mining, is either open pit or underground. So, and we have one of each. The mineralogy is obviously different to gold. I mean, the ore body that we have 2 distinct ore bodies. We have what's called a high-grade komatiite channel. And so basically that was a lava flow many millions of years ago. And then obviously what happened is as the material ran very, very quickly along the seafloor, the nickel was sort of basically the heavier metals, being the nickel, dropped out onto the bottom, and so then there's been structural changes that have gone on. So this thing's vertically dipping now almost 90 degrees straight down, and so we're just mining it vertically. The open pit's a bit different. That's what they call a disseminated ore body, and that's lower grade, and it's been formed differently. But we're lucky that those are both next to each other, only a couple of 100 metres apart, so we're quite lucky. So we can mine both of those together, put them through the processing plant that we've got there. And the great beauty of our project is, rather than a greenfield site where you need to get all the permits, all the approvals, long time to get those, and you've got to go and spend hundreds of millions of dollars to build a mine, a processing plant. We've got all that there, sitting there. It's been sitting on care and maintenance for 10 years, and we can refurbish the mill for about 40 million Australian dollars.
Okay. Have you got buyers? Because there's been lots of stories with metals of buyers of Australian assets, of Australian metals. Where are you up to on that one?
Yeah, look, what we've done is we've gone out for our concentrate, what we potentially will produce, which is a 15% nickel concentrate, which suits itself to a conventional nickel smelter, of which there are a number in the world. And we've spoken to most of those groups, and also traders and various other people that have got interest in nickel, and we've got a lot of inbound interest, including we've had quite a number of indicative offers that have been presented to us, which we've used in our feasibility study. So now that we've put the feasibility study out, as you said, the next phase for us is to go back to those people, get firm offers for terms, and then we'll shortlist down to a couple of parties, and we'll then negotiate an offtake agreement with one or more of those parties.
Just before you go, Peter, I just want to ask about all the M&A activity in the space at the moment. Obviously, when you've got a hot metal, there you go, there's a pun, yes. Not quite, but yeah, a popular metal or a metal that has certainly a great demand into the future, you're going to get takeover activity, IGO in Western areas. There's private equity, I think, has been involved as well. BHP, you mentioned, and Oz Minerals. Do you expect to see more of it?
Absolutely, yes. There's been a lot of interest in the sector, as you mentioned. There's a lot of private equity money where they've raised, hundreds or billions of dollars purely to be invested in battery metals, and clearly, nickel is one of those battery metals. Obviously copper and lithium and some of the rare earths as well. But fundamentally, if you're going to buy into the battery thematic, then nickel is one of the cornerstone investments. So yes, lots of activity. Kintera just recently made a takeover at a 45% premium for Cannon Resources, which is a nickel sulfide resource. There's no mine or processing plant. So yes, a lot of activity, and we saw that back in the mid 2000s when I was involved in another nickel sulfide business. The same thing. There was a huge amount of takeover activity, which culminated in the massive takeover of Lion Ore by Norilsk for $7 billion Australian dollars. There was the Jubilee takeover by Glencore. So there was a huge amount of activity back then, and I'm sure that we'll see similar sorts of things happening already, as you mentioned, Oz Minerals, BHP, and IGO taking over Western areas.
Peter, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
My pleasure, Sean.
That was Peter Harold, Managing Director and CEO of Poseidon Nickel. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. Remember, you should get professional advice before making any investment decisions. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.